Okay, it is November 15th at 2 p.m., and this is the Manzanita City Council workshop. Because this is a workshop, there will be no public input and no decision will be made today. Our agenda will focus on the new City Hall. We want to welcome all of the citizens, and we appreciate your participation in our workshop. But before I open the workshop, I would like to make a brief announcement. Deb Simmons resigned her position as mayor November 13th, 2023. This creates a vacancy on City Council, which the council must fill in accordance with Section 33 of the City Charter. Before filling the vacancy, council must post the position at City Hall and 3 other public places for a period of 30 days in advance of the appointment. After posting the position, council must invite all applicants to a regular council meeting and interview each applicant at that meeting. At the conclusion of the interviews, council must conduct a ballot to fill the empty position, the vacant position. Council will post the vacancy of this position for the mayor on November 20th, 2023, with applications due no later than December 20th, 2023 by 5 p.m. Council will hold interviews at the January 3rd, 2024 regular session meeting. So with that, I'm going to open the Manzanita workshop, City Council workshop, and pass the baton to Layla.
Thank you, Council President, and welcome everyone. I want to thank also Jesse Steiger, who is the city's owner's representative, and Chris Keene, who is the city's architect for this project. Just to kind of remind folks, the roles that these folks play are essential and critical to our project success. So Jesse, as the title implies, is the owner's representative, represents the city's interests with the design team, but she brings a special set of skills and knows how to work through construction projects. And so her job is to represent the city as if she were the city. And so she's done a bang up job with that. And I think you'll see kind of where we landed is in no small part due to her efforts, as well as that of the architect, Chris, who's responsible for doing the design element of this project. Jason Stegner, who is our contractor, was not able to be here today, but I did get some comments from him, and I know he's with us in spirit and would be here if he could, but he was present at the city's meeting last week where we approved the early work amendment for the abatement and demolition of the City Hall project. So it's been a minute since we have met with the City Council as a whole, the project. I've been keeping our liaisons, which are Jerry and Linda, up to speed with where we are, but today is an opportunity for us to introduce the rest of the council as well as the community with where we are with the design process, the budget process, and the funding process. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and walk us through that presentation. Sorry, I need to reorient myself, so just bear with me here. Okay, do you see my PowerPoint there?
We do.
Excellent. Okay. Well, as I said, this is an update. There's a lot of information going to be coming at you today. I do invite you to either just interrupt me or raise your hand if you have any questions as I go through the presentation. There's a lot of information here, so I don't want you to feel like you have to wait to the end, and I'll do my best to take pauses in places where I think you might have questions. All right, so the agenda is we'll go through sort of a review of the design process. So Chris, you can jump in here. You didn't see this slide earlier, but I actually created a slide to talk about the different phases of design. I think this is a great opportunity to get the community up to speed of like how this process works and how it relates to the estimating process for the budget. So Feel free to chime in at any time as I go through that slide. And then I'm going to hand the reins over to Chris, who will walk us through kind of the current design. And then we'll go through the land use process and what the next steps are there. And then we'll go into detail in the design development budget and discuss kind of the funding sources, because we've secured a loan since the last time we met, and want to get council thinking about kind of next steps with respect to that, and then leave some time at the end for any additional discussion. So we kind of have two processes that work hand in hand as we go through kind of the beginning of concept of we want a city hall till we actually open the doors and start operating that city hall. And we use a lot of acronyms, and so I'll do my best not to do that. But just to kind of let folks know, thanks, Catherine, where we are, is we've just completed the design development phase of the project. And I think those of you who have been working with me long enough to know that when we get to a certain stage in a project and a milestone, I always like to go back to the beginning, mostly to help just all of us remember how much we've done, how far we've come, but also we might have folks that are new to this process and may not understand or have been involved. And so I think it's always a courteous thing to do to remind folks of where we've been. So you start a process like this with pre-design phase. And that's where we develop our project team. So we spent some time doing that. And the architect, once they're selected, they help us with the site analysis, understanding the zoning, the scope of the budget, the scope of the project, the goals. We call a building program, which is what do you need in terms of space? What are the things that are required in this building? And at the same time, we as a city set what I kind of call a goalpost, so the target budget. Like we have about X amount of dollars that we think we can afford. So I think to relate this to, say, someone who might be building their own house, you might have a budget that you know you can afford, and then you start to work with your architect and contractor to design and build something that's within the range of that budget. But you're really just sort of saying, we ballpark think we can afford this. What we did in what we called phase one, so folks recall, we divided this project into two phases. Phase one, which would get us through schematic design, and then phase two, which council approved in June, moved us into the rest of the design process. So that's design development and then the construction documents. What I don't have on here is the construction administration. This is really getting us to the final kind of cost. And then schematic design, we start getting a little bit more granular, shape and size of the building, but really it's just basic design, building envelope, where walls might be, where the offices might be, where the things might be. We get a sense of what the basic exterior design looks like, and just kind of a sense of how the building will function and operate. We know the number of bathrooms at this point, how many toilets we'll have. But it's still pretty high level. But this does provide a framework for estimating costs, and that's primarily done based on quantities and what the contractor can see in that estimate. And they're doing that by getting informal bids from contractors. And one of the big reasons why we selected Jason is through his relationships he has with local contractors. We felt, and I believe you'll see with the numbers, that he did a pretty darn good job getting us close to what is a realistic budget based on the limited information you have. So if you kind of think of it as like a sieve, it's like, it's big picture, it's quantity. And then we start to know, okay, we have this many walls and this type of materials, but we don't have finishes, for example, really identified. So we're sort of still making educated guesses about what those costs are. And so that was the estimate that we provided back in, I think, March and in June. Then we get into design development. Am I doing okay on this so far, Chris, Jesse? All right, cool.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Okay. So design development, actually, we really start getting into the nitty gritty. More details. We start to really talk about what the interior finishes it are, windows, doors, fixtures, things of that nature. And then Chris starts actually engaging his sub-consultants, who are the engineering folks, the structural, the plumbing, the electrical, the HVAC, which is the air, and how it's heated and how the building functions. And then we start to lock in what the exterior finishes. So it's, again, now we're starting to get even more granular, much better understanding of how many square feet of a certain type of material we'll need. So that gets us to what we're calling the design development, or the DD estimate. And those set of plans. So if you think schematic design is just kind of like a very limited set of plans, the design development set of plans are far more detailed. And that gives the contractor way more specificity. Some items are still at the kind of quantity level, but it's much more specific. And so it gets us a lot closer to where we will end up in the next phase. And so those costs are also still based on informal bids. So it's really the level of precision is better in terms of the information provided, but the estimates are also good. But again, that comes down to the relationship of the contractor with other sub-consultants. And I think the team feels pretty confident in what we've received as being reliable information. So the next phase that we'll move into is the construction documents. And this really makes up the bulk of the work of the architect. And that's where really the technical design gets really ferreted out. You start to see like the thickness of the plan gets bigger and bigger as you get through this process. I remember when I did the library, I got the spec book, which is like the specifications, and it was like that big, which is like a foot. So we actually know like the type of screws that they're going to use, and those kinds of details are really detailed out in this plan. The interior and the exterior products, all those finishes, all that stuff is really dialed in at that point. And all the engineering, structural, plumbing, electrical, all that stuff has been finalized. So they are very detailed plans. And this is what Jason will then take out and competitively bid, because this is a public project. There are certain requirements he'll have to meet, but those are competitively bid. And so that then gives us the best level of information that we'll really have to then create what is the gross maximum price, or the guaranteed maximum price. And that's the big amendment that we will do to Jason's contract once we have all that information. And so that's what he's kind of saying, okay, subject to there's certain change orders that can happen that are, if you have questions about that, I'm sure Jesse can jump in here, but that really sets the project's budget at that time. So that's the next phase that we're entering into. And while we're not here to make decisions, we do want to kind of get general consensus from the council on the design, and Chris will go over that next, so that we can start to jump into this phase, because this is, again, it's the most detailed, the most technical. It's the heaviest lift for the architect and the whole design team, really. And we need kind of a sort of a head nod, like, yep, you're on the right track, so that we can get down that path. So I'll just pause there for a moment and just entertain any questions from anyone, or hopefully that kind of helps make sense and sets the ground of where we are. So we're really, if you can see my mouse, we're right here. We're about to enter into this phase of the project, which is really the last design phase. And what I didn't put on here is the construction administration. So Chris isn't going away when construction documents are done. We'll have weekly, what they call owner, architect, contractor meetings. And so Chris and his team will be involved throughout the construction. Should any constructability issues arise relating to the design, they're there all the way through till we get our certificate of occupancy. So there's still more to come for all of us. But in terms of the design and how we get to that GMP, that guaranteed maximum price, this is the process. And I just wanted it to be clearer, because I think probably folks in the community might be like, why is this number changing? And it's like, well, we're getting a lot more information, and that gives us a higher level of precision and a much better ability to make those estimates until those estimates actually become, something that's hard bid and we actually have a number for it.
And Layla, I just add to all that, and maybe this kind of goes without saying, but alongside the numbers that Jason is providing in this it's kind of this iterative process where we kind of are running things past Jason. He's giving us numbers, but then there's these benchmark estimates. Of course, in addition to the hard numbers he's giving, we have contingency that is added on top of those numbers. And that's what kind of absorbs the fluctuation over time in the numbers that we get in. So just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, and thanks for that. And I think to piggyback really briefly off of that, if you'll recall, we did an exemption to the public contracting rules so that we could do what we call the CMGC process, so construction manager, general contractor, so that, as I pointed out, Jason's been with us along the way, and I've sat through hours of meetings with these guys where they're going back and forth, and I can see how it's already saved the project money. The alternate would be that we actually go through this top level, right, design process all the way through, and then bid it out and be like, we hope we're close. Whereas in this case, with both schematic design and design development, we were able to kind of work together with the contractor to come up with a design that got us far closer to that target budget, as opposed to waiting till the end to bid it out, where it would have been just, we have no idea what it would have landed on. So that process has worked really well, and this team, I think, has done an outstanding job working together to get us to this target budget. Okay, shall I just continue on then?
Well, maybe I could ask something to clarify, just to see where it fits in today, or if it fits in another time. So this is the design process and the estimating process that's been going on, what I'd say kind of internally, to the city staff and the Jesse and Jason and Chris and other folks at the architecture firm who've been working on this. How does further public review or community review and input fit into this process? Will we talk about that today, or will that be a subject for another time?
Yeah, well, we can certainly talk about it today. I think we did a lot of that community work up front. We spent a lot of time engaging with the community around the values and the goals of the project. And so, and when we talked about kind of once we kicked the project off in schematic design, that we would do informed sessions about where we are landing. So it isn't really in the kind of project timeline to take additional feedback on the design, because we really did a lot of that work up front. And my hope would be that kind of once we get through the land use process, we can, and a little bit further along in the design process, we can share those plans. We can maybe do some sort of engagement opportunity with folks so they can see where the project is at. But my next slide kind of goes through like what we've done in that period of time that we sort of went dark, so we can illuminate, shed a little light on what's been happening in the background. And I think you'll see that a lot of this work has really started since June. We took a pretty big pause. So that's kind of how we've always couched this, is that all that work we spent multiple public meetings getting feedback, and the design that we've come up with, I think, really does reflect that.
I think that's a well thought out response, and I agree with the principle of that. And I'm not suggesting opportunities to go back and redo. I think from a project perspective and the perspective of the community, we could think a little bit about, in addition to what we're doing today, which I hope is going to be helpful to people who may not be present now, but we'll be looking at this later. Think about how we can kind of bring those early sessions and the time that was spent, kind of bring that back to life again in how we talk about this. Because for most people, I think it's a long time ago, and I always think this is not like the top of mind for most folks. And so people forget. I forget, we're all, so we kind of got to get back in the stream of people being engaged and then seeing it. Because the other thing realistically we experience, and I know this is not any new idea I'm bringing up, is most of us won't really know what it's going to look like until we start to see some pictures. And then we can start to say, oh, I like what that looks like, or that is a good feel. And we should expect people to have opinions about that. So it'd be good to think about how we could engage that without slowing the project down or doing a redo, but getting people to be able to link into what's happening. The biggest question people have been asking me is, when are we going to get going on tearing down the old thing? When are we going to start the new? And so this is a chance to get going and get people seeing and visualizing a little more what that plot of land up there is going to look like. So it's an opportunity, I think, and I know we all want to take advantage of that. So thanks, Layla.
You bet. And that's great feedback. I think we'll touch on about half of that or more today. But I respect and appreciate the comment about tying this back to the community outreach process. And so I'll work with the team to, as we do our next update, to kind of go back to that again and to sort of let folks know kind of how that informed the design. But that's a great comment, and we'll do that.
Thanks.
So before I hand it over to Chris, I'm sorry, did you have another question there? Oh, right.
Fran, good.
Yeah. Under design development, you've got a bullet point that says exterior finishes are locked in. Was that a budgetary consideration that was done part of the design development portion of it?
Well, I think, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for the pricing aspect, we do want to have a really clear understanding of what those exterior finishes are at this stage, because it is one of the bigger parts of the budget. And this is actually an excellent question that ties into something that Catherine just brought up with respect to the community. So one of the major things we heard from the community is no hardy panel, and we want to see something that fits in with Manzanita, like cedar. So you'll see that the proposed siding on the building is cedar. Now that costs a lot more than other alternatives. And we as a team, relying on that community feedback and the goals that were set by the council, held tight to that finish. And so the price that you'll see reflects that cost. So hopefully that answers your question.
And if I could just add to that, I think the reason we try to lock it in at this point is both cost but it's also how we end up detailing the assemblies of the building. So as we go into this next phase, we're really drawing assemblies and working through insulation and working through all of these details, how the material turns corner, et cetera. So we really need to have a good idea of what that finish is as we kind of enter this next phase. And to Layla's point, we've been assuming cedar all along. One of the things that we learned during this estimating process was there's a considerable difference in cost between the cedar shingles and a cedar vertical siding, for example. So those are the kind of things that we've been weighing, and you'll see in the early images that we were showing, we were using a cedar shingle on the images. Now we've kind of transitioned to a vertical cedar siding because the delta was significant enough that we thought that this decision would still be in keeping with the kind of the goals and values kind of established early on. But it was a number that seemed worth trying to bring down a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yes.
That's great. I'll move on and then I'll hand it over to Chris. So, okay. So sorry for all the words. But just to give you a timeline of where we are. So council, the special session, directed staff to proceed with scheme 1 and demolish the buildings that are on the site. There's a lot of work that went into that. And we'll talk about that momentarily. But between then and June 7th, we really did kind of pause. We did some things, but we were really waiting to work with council. We were going through the budget process. I did financial forecasting to help move council along with the decision-making process of how to finance the project. So the design sort of slowed down, but the activity with respect to how we're actually going to build this thing really kicked up on the city side. So a couple of you probably remember, and I know most of you were participated in that in one form or another, that there were multiple meetings that we had with the council to discuss that, and then through the budget process. And so, it was important that we did that so that we can understand what our opportunities were for financing. But that's when June 7th is when City Council approved phase 2. So that was for us to move into that design development and basically funding the remainder of the contracts for both architect and for our owner's rep, and as well funded the cost for the demolition and abatement of the existing buildings on that site. And council also passed a resolution at that June meeting that authorized me to seek debt financing for the project from the Special Public Works Fund. And I will have an update for you on that as we get towards the end of this. So once that occurred, Chris really, but us as a team, we've been meeting a lot over the last several months. We resumed design. We held several meetings with city staff. So Chris sat down with all of us multiple times to refine the structure. He also started engaging a sub-consultant team. So that's the structural, the landscape, the mechanical, engineering, and plumbing subs. So that part of the description I described earlier, like that stuff hadn't been done yet. So then he and his team started getting really deep into that. We also conducted additional geotechnical investigation. So City Council actually authorized a contract amendment to do additional work on the geotech, and we did additional work on the hazardous materials. So we really started diving into that. What I didn't put in here, but I should have, is that we also went through the State Historic Preservation Office, Section 106 of Federal Code relating to historic properties to get clearance to be able to tear those buildings down. So as a city, a local entity, if we own property with buildings that are 50 years or older, we have to go through that process. And we did get that clearance on, I believe it was August 31st. So we did all of that. And we learned some things in that process, which you'll start to see as we talk about the budget. But we completed design development phase that happened in late September. And then we shared those plans with our contractor. The CMGC conducted that pricing in October. And then we have been working together over the last month, really up until about the week before last, to get to a target budget that we feel good about showing you today that aligns with the design that you'll see. We also held a pre-application conference. So Chris and team came and, as required by our zoning ordinance, met with city staff, fire department, et cetera, and held our pre-application on the 17th. The land use application has been submitted. It's under review, and we're anticipating December 11th land use design review hearing with the Planning Commission. So any questions about that before I hand it over to Chris or Jesse? If you guys have anything to add, please do.
Well, sure. The other thing we did in there is put together a whole distinct package to bid out the abatement and demo. And so that is approved, and you're going to see some activity on site after Thanksgiving when they start the abatement of the facilities and then move into demolition.
Thanks. Okay. Drum roll, please. I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Okay, thanks, Layla. I hope everyone's kind of familiar with this. Is the kind of site plan that we ended the phase 1 scope of work with at the end of all of our community outreach. Once we were it was approved to remove the existing buildings. A lot of the conversations during that process had to do with really trying to be efficient about how we use the site, so that there's space for other development in the future. Essentially, the plan was to move it into the kind of corner down here between Manzanita Avenue and Classic Street, which currently is really just a bit of an alley. And there's public parking to the west, and to the north is essentially the staff and police parking. And so I hope everyone can see this well enough, but really the blue area, it was the police, the red is City Hall, and the yellow in this image is the council chambers room. As we start getting into the kind of next phase, one of the things that immediately became apparent as we started to get more pricing information was, if you recall, the police station part of this building needs to be built at a risk category 4 level. The rest of the building does not. And as we got into the further geotech studies and we started working with our structural engineer, it became pretty clear that the foundation requirements, because of the soils on site for the police department, were significant enough that it made sense for us to consider actually separating the buildings from each other, right? So the police building itself will have to sit on deep foundations. And the expense of the deep foundations were such that we did not want or couldn't afford to do that for the whole building. So that starts to present some complexity if you have 2 foundation systems in one footprint. So again, working through this process with our engineers and then with Jason and his subcontractors, we started to arrive at a scheme similarly sited, but that decoupled the police volume from the City Hall pieces. So maybe we can go to the next. And on the screen here, as you see that. Obviously, the form of the building has evolved as well, but the police volume to the north is essentially a standalone building connected to the City Hall building via a covered pergola. It is accessible directly off the lobby, which separates the City Council chamber and the City Hall space. Yes, space. Again, the parking for staff and police is to the north, and the public parking is to the west. And I understand the conversation about kind of sharing this more broadly with the community. We're happy to kind of do a deeper dive into this stuff whenever is requested, Layla, or by anyone else. So our site plan essentially is very similar. The zoning requirements for parking were a little bit, they required a little more than we were hoping we could convince them of. But so the parking lots have expanded a bit. But generally, the site is building is sited as it was previously, and all the parts kind of remain the same, although configured slightly differently. And if you go to the next slide.
Just pause
for
a sec and just see if anybody has any. We can always come back, but just if you do have any initial comments or concerns. We can show you some pictures. Go ahead, Catherine.
Just it's a ballpark sort of question, Chris. So bear with me.
Sure.
There's some kind of ratio you could use to say, so for a police building this size that has to be done at a risk category 4 versus a building of the same size that would be, what the rest of the city and council chamber would look like. I mean, is that like a 3-to-1 ratio for the cost of the foundations, or a 10-to-1, or just how much bigger is it to have to do that foundation that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little hard to unpack. Jesse, maybe you remember exactly, but we're talking about, for the deep foundations here, they have to go down over 60 feet to bedrock. I think we're more than 3-to-1, probably closer to 10-to-1 in terms of the foundation costs. But I can get you that number more specifically because I don't want to misspeak here. But it's hundreds of thousands of dollars just for the foundation under the blue area you see here because of the way the soil moves. So
It's about 300,000.
Yeah.
So does the 10-to-1 kind of work out just as a rough?
10 might be a little more than it is, but
Okay.
we can refer to the estimates that we have and get you that more precisely if you'd like.
No, I don't need it precisely. I'm just thinking about when people look at this, when they partly wonder why we have. Now I'm getting feedback. Is that just me that hears it?
I hear it.
I hear it, but it might be my computer, so I'll mute.
Okay.
I can find the mute
Could
button.
be me too, but so people wonder, gosh, that's, why is that so much? And so I'm just in a common sense sort of way saying, because of the requirement, and it's a requirement, it's not a decision we get to make about how to build the foundation for the police station,
Correct.
is
So-
adding considerable cost. And that's a cost that's part of the project, and we have to just work with that. Is that a good assessment?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have the estimate pulled up in front of me. It's actually a little close to 10-to-1, maybe not quite, but I'm looking at, what's that, like 50 grand about in just concrete work for the foundations for the rest of the building versus about 300,000 for the deep foundations for the police. So it's the deep foundations is a significant project cost.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's why we made the change, right? From having a single building, because it starts to build on itself, right? It's not just the cost of that area foundation. If the buildings are connected, then they have to be seismically isolated from each other, and there's another $100,000 in seismic joints. So we were trying to be, and we worked obviously with the police folks as well. We ran this by everybody working in the building to make sure they were comfortable with it. But it just seemed like a really tall order for a building of this size to absorb that much cost to make the whole thing, on a deep foundation. So that's kind of where we headed. So I think, ultimately, though, the way the building will be experienced from the street and from the neighborhoods is really no different. In fact, there's something nice about having a little bit less mass, I think. This is obviously an aerial shot looking from Manzanita Avenue. Process drawing, I will say, but this is the massing of the building. Building is a vertical cedar siding on it. We have metal roofs on both volumes. We have a stained or painted trellis piece in between the volumes and one out front. The landscaping that you see here is, not precise. The plants you're seeing are not exactly the plants probably that will be there, but the planting palette will be, as much of it will be native as possible. It will not be irrigated. It will all be very drought tolerant. We're working with our landscape architects who have a lot of experience working on the coast to do that. And so the idea is that this building is really, it's not a huge, tall facility. It kind of fits into the neighborhood nicely. The parking for the staff is kind of tucked around the back off of Manzanita Avenue with the access off of Classic, and the public parking space to the west with kind of simple paths up to the front entry point. You can see where that trellis is out front. That is essentially the lobby space that you saw in the previous image. To the left of that is the council chamber room. The council chamber room is a place where we're spending a little bit of money on the interior finishes. We are hoping to reuse some of the lumber or timber that's been pulled down that will come down with the buildings on site to do some cladding of the walls. There will be some finishes in there. We're hoping to end up with a wood slat ceiling in there. So that room will be a little bit have a little bit higher level of finish than the rest. The rest is all fairly straightforward, but really nice daylight, and kind of, I think, efficiently laid out. And then what I guess I should also mention, there is a garage that the police will use that is at the end of the building, and based on our kind of the use that it has and the conversations we've had with the code officials, we were able to pull that out of the risk category 4 piece, and put it on this building. So that was another way of really downsizing the footprint of that expensive foundation. We're developing more views. This is a view from the street. Here you see large windows on the left into the council chambers. That kind of lower bar in the front is primarily workspace for city staff, open office and office space. Oops. And then, again, straight into the lobby to your right will be the reception for City Hall staff and for the police. And to your left, when there's an event, you'll go right in through a nice pair of double doors into the council chamber room. As I said, we're happy to come back at any time with more kind of presentation level drawings, but this is kind of a snapshot as to where we are now. The technology we use these days makes everything look finished from a very early stage in terms of how we render these buildings, but we're getting dialed into amassing into a material palette here, I think. So we're getting pretty close to what this thing will look like.
So you just pause here for a minute, and again, just so I'll post this on the website too, just for folks.
So the cedar siding, is that stained a gray? Is that?
What you're seeing this image. It's often we will leave the cedar to weather to a silver, which is, but that is a decision that I would say is still open. We'll probably work with facilities folks and get their input on that. As I'm sure you all know, living out there, having to stain and restain your homes every few years can create some real work. So we kind of like the idea of the building silvering, but of course we've got options there.
Well, I particularly like the entrance into the council chambers. I think the way that's set up makes it very efficient and easy to access. And I'm assuming the bathrooms are next to the direction out to the police station.
That's correct. Yeah, I should have mentioned that one of the things, and again, it's very hard in this small plan, I recognize, to see the 2 public restrooms that are essentially off of the lobby are also, that corridor that goes directly out to the police station. There's some thinking that we would be able to leave those bathrooms open when the rest of the building is closed. For example, if you've got the farmers market set up there, that those toilets might be accessible then to the public, with the rest of the building being able to be secure. So that's why there's that kind of extra set of doors between the lobby and those bathrooms, that we can lock that during non-business hours. But if you wanted to open up the toilet rooms to the public for an event, that would be possible.
Oh, that's excellent. I like that a lot.
I'm actually going to apply for one of TCVA's capital project grants in hopes that we'll get some resources to help support that cost. So we'll see. Okay. And as always, if you have thoughts or comments on this later, you can just let us know. But everyone's good. We'll move on to the numbers.
Looks good.
Okay. All right. So just again, we're going through the design development budget. So we're going to go over an overview of the current budget. I always like to kind of when I show you something once and I come back to you, I like to show how it's changed over time. So I know for members of the public, we're really going to see this on the screen now. Again, we'll post this on the city's website so that you can see the numbers a little bit closer. I will note that it didn't get up sooner because we've been working to the line on this. So that's that. But I did want to kind of compare where we are. So we're going to talk through that. And I really did try to detail out because I want to be as fully as transparent as possible, provide enough information, but not overload you with information. So in the columns here, this indicates kind of what the cost item is. We had an initial estimate back in March based on that kind of schematic design volume. We made a couple of changes between March and June. So that's the SD estimate in June, and then we calculated that variance, and I'll talk through all of these. And then where we are today, and then what that variance is between June of 23 and November. So one of the things we did was we dropped the cost consultant and we refined the hazardous materials abatement number somewhat. We added some additional scope. The council was involved in that. And so that increased the cost of these hazardous materials consultants. So those are the folks, and Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong, that came in and actually did the abatement design work that she mentioned. We had someone come in and assess the kind of extent of the hazardous materials, but then we actually, in order to get in there and clean it up, we needed a design component to them. And so we had to adjust our estimate. It came in, it was a little different than what we had projected. And that happens. We also, to help kind of make up for that cost, we made some adjustments to the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So that's everything from the AV, the audiovisual equipment that will be going into, say, council chambers throughout the facility, tables, desks, chairs, any of the low voltage costs, including the cost to install that, security cameras, et cetera. And we're working hard to refine that budget right now. The geotechnical, as we mentioned, we also increased that budget because of what we learned through the process. And I believe this also includes just kind of the ongoing involvement of the geotech consultant throughout the foundation when it gets poured. And then finally, we did remove the grant consultant. We had that in the original budget so that we could get to the same bottom line that we were at in March. So that overall total didn't change. And we kind of took stuff away as we added stuff into the budget. So again, this refinement process that we go through. So now, as we get into the design development, the biggest increase you can see here is obviously in the hard costs. So the hard costs include everything related to the construction of the building. And broad brush, the major changes that resulted in this number is this scope, which is shown as a negative because we actually reduced that cost here because we were carrying what we call everything. I should note everything below the hard cost line is what we call kind of the owner side. So that's the soft cost number I'll show you in the chart next. We kind of carry that all on our side, whereas the contractor has the hard costs. So we shifted. We had been carrying the cost for the hazardous materials abatement in our scope. That's now been moved into the contractor's budget. So this total number is reflective of the $319,000 early work amendment that you approved last week. So I just want to make that clear. The other major change here, as I think as Chris alluded to, is the foundation, the increase in the cost of the foundation. That came with additional due diligence and analysis. It became evident that our initial estimate was far off. So that's largely the cost differences between this 3.7 number and the 4.2. Jesse, did I miss anything kind of big here? there's little stuff throughout, but that's the big picture.
Yeah, abatement and the deep foundation is really what that cost is made up of.
Thanks. Just a minor increase in the cost of the hazardous materials consultant. We removed the traffic study because through our work with the code and the additional analysis we did of the zoning ordinance, it's not required. We also increased the building permit fees, and we may have some flexibility here. So, I'm working on trying to find every penny for this project. But we did want to be conservative. And so based on the increase, so building permit fees are based on the construction hard costs. So that obviously had to go up as the total cost of the project went up. We had not accounted for, so this stands for BOLI. You'll hear us say this. That's the Bureau of Labor and Industry. So a project like this, one of the questions I've had is, why is this so much more expensive than building a house? BOLI wages, so Jason's talked about this before, but the Bureau of Labor and Industries were required to pay a prevailing wage on the trades that are involved in this project. And those are, I think, Jesse, like 20 to 30% higher than, say, if you just hired a contractor to build your house as a private citizen. Just kind of while I'm on that topic, like, why does it cost so much more to build a commercial building? Prevailing wage is a big one. There's more complicated construction techniques that go into this. And in talking with Scott, Jason was here, he'd be able to wax on poetic about this, but he actually gave me these talking points. So that's another thing. And then the soil amendments that we talked about with the foundation are obviously different. And then Scott, our building official, noted for me that, it's a different occupancy than a residential type of construction. And so Chris can probably elaborate if needed, but there's higher fire life safety requirements here. And there are different standards for egress, different standards for things like that. So, and we have engineers that are designing our mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. And whereas a residential code the building code allows for a prescriptive code. So if the architect can just design to that prescriptive code, you don't usually have to hire engineers to do that work. So those are just a handful of the reasons why a commercial building, a public building, a building that will have the occupancy that our council chambers will have, sort of drive the cost differences between, a single family home. And I think that the BOLI wages, the Bureau of Labor and Industry wages, are a big part of that. So when we get down, I'm a very sensitive screen here. Get down to it, the total project costs for a current estimate are $5.41 million, which is when you take out all the stuff that was there and you add in all the stuff that went up, sort of a delta of $332,000. We also reduced our contingency to help make up some of that financial gap. And we reduced that by about $125,000, leaving us with, essentially a gap between the 5.8 roughly that we estimated in June 23 of $207,000. So that's the overall total project increase based on our current estimate since June. And I'll jump into this next slide and then we can come back to this, but I think I see things a little better in a different visual. So this was beautiful visual that Jesse pulled together to talk to us about what the total project costs were. So this is based on the June estimate. We had a escalation fee in here, or escalation estimate. You'll see that we ate that up. We did not have a design contingency. We have a construction contingency that's still in the current budget. And then our soft cost number, and that got us to a total of $5.79 or $5.8 million total project costs. Where are we today? We're at $6 million. So you can see the hard cost ate up that escalation. So this is just sort of redundant, but I wanted to keep it the same. Sorry. We still have a construction contingency built into the total hard costs. So that gets us to a total hard cost of 4.26 million. Our soft costs have moderated slightly, but again, it's because we were shifting some stuff around. Some things went up, some things went down. And we still are maintaining an owner contingency. And I want to note that the estimated amount of the GMP is less the early work amendment, right? So we've already approved that. So the GMP that we're estimating as of today will be just shy of $4 million. The owner's contingency is still here, and so that's built into the overall project cost of $6 million. So would you rather me stay here, or do you want to go back to the detailed budget? And I'm be glad to pause and take questions.
Well, it seems to me that based on the foundation for the police station, which has gone up exponentially, that coming in at 207,000 over what we estimated is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've seen worse, trust me. And I think that does speak to, I appreciate that comment, because I do think that speaks to, again, the relationship between our team working together to get to that number. And again, our just having a local contractor who really understands the environment out here, and to be able to get that close in the SD estimate, to me shows that there's that skill set.
So I know we talked about the assessment of the ground and the site when we approved the early payment, I'm sorry, Lena, what was the term for that? The
early work amendment.
The early work amendment, thank you, the early work amendment. So I'm thinking, based on that and what we've discussed so far, I guess I should pose it as a question rather than an assumption. Are we out of the stage where we should expect to have good-sized surprises? You know, surprises come in these projects. So are we, I won't say out of the woods, but are we nearly out of the woods in terms of the cost management and really knowing we're going to be able to manage to the number that we have now?
I'm gonna, I have an answer to that, but I'm gonna kick it to Jessie, because she and I actually had a really in-depth conversation about this. Because we still have let's just put this back up here, a good contingency built in, right? So it's like, can't we just take that away? So I like, Jessie, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, I'd like you to answer that, because you did it really well, and I think can expand on it.
Well, I forgot what I told you, but I'm going to make up something new, and you can help.
We're talking about the foundation and the risk of the foundation, and how, that is where, I think we, as I tried to explain, we get to more detail. Some costs could change once we actually get hard bidded. So we're crossing our fingers that we have enough in contingency to eat whatever changes come from that. But the real risk that we're still kind of like holding our breath on, and that we feel pretty good about, I think, right, Jessie, with the geotech work we've done, is the foundation. That is the point in which, once the foundation's done, then we can all probably take a little bit deeper breath of like, all right, we're good. So Jessie, you said that part a lot more eloquently than I just did, but maybe you could elaborate a little further.
No, that's it's an excellent point, and that's really what we try to do, is to balance the amount of contingency we have with the amount of predictable risk we might be encountering. And so our first really risk phase is when we get into the abatement. We have a very thorough survey, we have very thorough documentation, but when you go into an old building and you start abating it, it's it happens where you can encounter a whole set of stuff you didn't know it was there because it was covered up as we get into the abatement and demolition phase. So if we that's kind of our first speed hump to get over as far as budget alignment. Like if we get through abatement and we haven't seen any overages, that's a great sign. And then our next biggest one is that deep foundations, because foundations can be really challenging. The design is based upon a limited sampling, right? They take a couple borings across the site that gives you an idea of what the site will look like. But when they actually get in and they actually have to install these deep foundations in its location, sometimes they hit rock early and you save so many. Sometimes you have to go a little bit deeper and adjust on the fly. So when we get through that foundation phase, that's a huge element of risk we get past. So we hold enough contingency to cover us for these abatement risks and for the foundation risks. Once you're past that, really the biggest risk usually with owners is you guys changing your mind 1,000 times and then we have to go back and redo something because we have it all designed. And so the design we have, the estimating we have it's based upon also still some limited information. Chris and his whole team have really a lot more work to do to refine the design. But the budgets we've put together, we try to kind of balance how conservative they are against the amount of detail we have. So Jason's given us numbers, but he's erred a little bit on the conservative side because the design is going to progress and we're going to learn more about the project as we go. So I think, and I think Chris would say, I think Jason would say, what we have, we feel is achievable. We might have some challenges in front of us, but I think we're all feeling like pretty good about this budget and where we're at right now. So are there risks? Of course, there always are. Are they manageable? I believe so. Manageable within the $6 million we're showing you right now. Does that help?
So you came up with the owner's contingency based on these risks, or is it a percentage? How do you come up with the owner's contingency?
This one was really more of a percentage. In the early one, we carried 15%, and you carry more contingency for your contingency is higher when you know the least amount of information. Now we know more. So at this phase, it's pretty typical to say, you know what, I'm good with 10% contingency. That's usually enough to balance that. And then this one's a little bit over 10%, so we have a little bit of extra fluff. So this one's really more based upon about 10%, but also just looking at the number and thinking about the relative exposure of abatement and the foundations and what those orders of magnitude could be. And this seems like an appropriate amount of money to hold in case some of those risks come true.
Okay. Well, again, reach out if you have questions that come up later or in presentation or
One more question.
Tomorrow morning. Sure.
Based on Catherine's question, so we're looking at the issue of abatement and the foundation. So abatement we'll know fairly quickly. When will we know the kind of actual cost of the foundation? Where will we be in this process?
So right now we are hoping to get this project out to bid, if Chris won't get too mad at me, sometime in January. And then once the bids come in, that's really when we'll know. So Jason's already talked to 2 foundation contractors who do this type of work. So we already know we have 2 interested parties, which is good. We definitely want competitive bidding for the scope, because it is a pretty big expense and it's challenging work. So once we get those bids, we're hoping that should be sometime in February. So our goal right now would be to come to you with a GOP amendment in March. Our timing is tight, so it's possible that could slip, but we really want to try and hold that line. So we're looking at March, I think, or late February and early March of understanding what the bid amount of the foundations is. And then frankly, that's really one of the first tasks that's going to happen on site. And so we would know that really early in construction. I think within the first couple of months is if we see some, larger overages than we had hoped for. And which frankly gives us plenty of time. Like it gives us some time to make some adjustments to the rest of the project if we need to, if that's a big hit. Like we have some ideas kind of buried in our soft costs. We can maybe get fewer pieces of furniture or something. Like we have some ideas of how we could kind of rob a little bit of money from other parts of the budget if we had to.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, I got a quick question. I probably should have asked Jason this last Wednesday, but as I recall, I think he said that he only got one bid on the abatement. He had several bids on the demolition. The demolition costs ended up being lower than projected, and the abatement costs were higher. And I don't think it's so simple as to say, well, that wouldn't have been the case if you had more bids on abatement, but it was a little concerning that right out of the chute, we had a situation where we were underestimated, and it happened to be in a no bid or a one bid scenario. So, how over the course of the project, how confident are you that we're going to get our money's worth through the competitive bidding process, or are we going to bump into that situation again, do you think?
It's hard to say because the bidding environment is always going to be tougher at the coast. So we know this. Then it's going to be based upon other people's workloads. I think it's promising that the construction industry in general, I think, is seeing a slowdown coming. I believe that people are going to want to get in on any of the action that they can. So I think that's going to help us. Frankly, a bid environment sometimes is really influenced by the connections a general contractor has, the quality of the documents, some of the requirements we put on the project. So we're being strategic really about all of that, not trying to require more than what's necessary so that we can encourage bidders. We're talking to people early to get their interest in it. Like we already have been talking to a couple electrical subcontractors, mechanical subs. They've been involved in the project. So I feel like we're taking the right steps to help guarantee a successful outcome. But honestly, until bid day, you simply cannot know. And it's a stressful time on any project.
Were you disappointed with or surprised, I should say, by the one bid on the abatement? No, not really. Okay. I mean, you always hope for more, but again, you just can't guarantee it. Sometimes the size of a project matters a lot. If there were two or three, let's say Portland companies who were thinking about it, but then looked at the size and scope of it and were like, it's not worth the drive out there to us. That can limit your bidding pool as well. So that's really where Jason's really trying to lean on his network of people who are already out at the coast, because he's got a much higher success rate of getting those bids and getting them to participate in the project. Okay.
Okay. Good questions. So next steps, and then I think Chris has a full schedule, so I think we can cut him loose if he wants to go after this section, because we'll start getting into the financing side of things. You're welcome to stay, but I just want to offer you that out. So abatement and demolition, as Jesse mentioned, will start in December. I think Jason's meeting with the contractor on site on Friday and getting that work going. We had our kickoff earlier this week. And then design really will proceed once land use approval is received, unless it's already going, which it might be, actually. So we're aiming and hoping to get our land use approval in December. And so then the design team will just be working on the permit set for construction, to complete the construction documents. And then the CMGC will do that competitive bid using those construction documents, and that forms the foundation of the guaranteed gross maximum price amendment, which, as Jesse pointed out, we're targeting March for that. Okay, I'm going to move to funding. Some updates here. So I wanted to provide an update on the Special Public Works Fund loan. By Chris, thanks a lot. We've kind of gone through a couple iterations of the funding strategy. So I just want to go through similar to what I did with the cost and how that's evolved. I want to talk with you a little bit about COVID relief funds and kind of my hopes for that. And then just to start to entertain a discussion around loan versus cash and how we finance the rest of this project. So the Special Public Works Fund was approved on October 6, 2023. The Infrastructure Finance Authority, which is the board that makes this decision on behalf of Business Oregon, actually approved us for a loan up to $5.1 million. And the reason for that is that when we apply, we have to say what money we actually have in hand and then what's needed. And so they make that determination. You'll recall that currently I only have authority to take out $4 million, but we'll talk through that, and then we may end up somewhere else on that. But we do have the ability to take out 5.1, which we won't need, but it's nice to know it's there. It'll be structured as an interim loan, and that accrues at 2% on the actual funds that are dispersed. So if you recall, we met with Business Oregon staff. One of the reasons that we elected to go with this funding mechanism was that we borrow as we need the money. So in a typical kind of full faith and credit financing, we would actually take out the full amount of the loan when we close on the contract. That's not the case with the Special Public Works Fund. We take it out as we need it. So if we come in under budget, which is always our goal, we may not need to take out the full amount that we anticipate. We're only accruing interest on that at the time that we're taking out the debt. And I believe that we don't start paying the debt service until it's sold. And this is a change, so I want to make sure we touch on this, until it's turned into a permanent financing. So kind of think of this interim loan as like a construction loan that converts to a permanent loan once construction is done. We can only do that for a period up to 2.5 years. It's not really a problem for us. We're expecting, I said expecting 12 to 16 months, but I think it'll be on the lower end of that number. The change since the last time we spoke is the loan that the IFA approved, because it was over, I think, $3 million is their threshold, that it will be sold to the bond bank. So originally, I think we had a discussion with the staff there, and it was made clear to me and a couple of other of us here that it wouldn't be sold to the bond bank, but that's actually not a decision that the staff makes. And so the IFA board has recommended, because of the potential size of the loan, that it be sold to the bond bank. And so that means it will be secured for 10 years. And so we can't refinance it in that 10-year period. And that's the time, and the rate for the permanent debt will be set at that time. And so we're currently estimating that to be 4%. That could go down, it could go up. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. I still think that the Special Public Works Fund is superior to a full faith and credit debt obligation for the reasons I've already described, which is that we only take what we need. We're paying very low interest on the debt as we're taking it out. And any other loan, we would have to be, we would be stuck with it for 10 years as it is anyway. So I just wanted to make that clear. And if there's any questions you have, I'll do my best to answer them. The the next steps in terms of the process, just so you have a sense of what happens next, is that council will need to pass a resolution that authorizes me to execute that loan. So then that would give me the authority to borrow up to 5.1, whatever the exact amount that's indicated here. The city attorney has to provide an opinion. So the contract documents, the draft resolution and opinion are with the city attorney right now. And I am anticipating actually at this point, either December or January, to request approval of the contract documents and the resolution. I wouldn't sign those contract documents until the city attorney issues their opinion, which I spoke with James today, and they're anticipating being able to do that probably in early December. So that would then give me the authorization I need to sign that loan. It doesn't mean we're borrowing 5.1 million and change at all. You will be in control of what that number looks like. Primarily when you approve the GMP, you will be approving the final project budget. And at that time, we should also have a very good sense of how much money we would like to borrow versus how much cash we want to put in. And then when I get to the funding slide, I can go through that. But I'm going to pause here and see if you have any questions specifically about this loan, which I'm very excited about. I think it's awesome.
So, Leila, I have a question that might be a dumb one, but I don't know the answer, so I'm going to ask it. Is the 2.1% that we're paying before the loan gets sold to the bond bank, is that rate, is whatever debt we draw during that 12 to 16 month period or whatever it turns out to be, is the interest rate on that debt converted to 4% when it gets sold, or do we end up paying two different interest rates over the course of the debt?
It's the latter. So during the year or so that we're borrowing that money, we'll be accruing interest on that loan as we draw it at 2%. Then that total loan value at that time, including the 2% interest, will get converted into a permanent loan that will be set at that time, that interest rate.
All right. I thought you answered me, and then you lost me when you kept going.
Darn it.
So, I'm just trying to understand it. Well, so I'm trying to understand if there's a incentive for us to aggressively take out debt during that interim period at a lower rate. Obviously, you can't take out money that you're not spending. But if there is a way to spend certain monies before the conversion versus after the conversion, does that pay off?
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. So no, because we can't convert the loan until all of the spending is complete. So we have to finish everything. So if we borrowed it today, we borrowed more up front, we're actually paying interest longer on a larger amount up front. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then, so we borrowed, if we were able, and it's reimbursement based, I should note too. When we get to the next slide, I'll talk about the process for us to budget for that, because most of you will all recall during the budget process, I was like, we're coming back with a supplemental budget once we know how we're paying for this thing. And so that's the next step. So I hear what you're saying. No, it's probably better for us to borrow less up front, because then we're paying less interest on the principal.
Okay.
But I like how you think. So any questions, concerns, or comments about that?
So I guess the biggest risk we're taking is we don't know what the percentage interest will be when it's sold to the bond bank. So that's kind of the unknown.
Yeah. And my understanding is they reserve the loans that we had actually talked about with them for, I think, much lower cost because this is a pool of money they use to help fund. There was a city hall fire station that was on the same agenda that we were in October, and they're also getting financing in the same kind of process. But smaller projects tend to be part of those, the other kind of loan. But yes, that is the risk. Okay, so on to the next. So we have to do a supplemental. This amount of money, whatever it ends up being, is more than 10% or greater. So that means City Council passes a supplemental budget. This actually doesn't go to the Budget Committee. It comes straight to City Council. We'll let the Budget Committee know in writing once we know when this is happening and the amount of money. But you would hold a public hearing. It should be noticed 5 days in advance of the hearing, put it in the paper, etc. And then ultimately you pass a resolution that amends the budget to account for the funds that are coming in and the funds that are going out, and then the exchange of funds between funds. So we'll be receiving money, we anticipate, into the general fund from the Special Public Works Fund, and then we will transfer funds into the City Hall Fund to pay for that, because the capital project will be paid out of the City Hall Fund, but the debt will be paid out of the general fund, because actually at the end of the construction, we will actually close the City Hall Fund, and then the debt will just be paid out of general fund, because the debt is backed by our general fund revenue. So the anticipated resolution will look something like there will be a transfer from the general fund of a dollar amount into the City Hall Fund, and a receipt of funds into the general fund that's equal to that into the general fund as a loan. And as I mentioned, this is a reimbursement-based loan. So we will actually pay money out and then submit reimbursement to the state, and the state will pay us back. And so Nina's on point. I'm sure Jesse will help us through all of that. So that's coming up. I am hoping to do that at some point, either in December or January, because that's going to be necessary to do prior to the authorization of the GMP. And what we'll be approving, I should know too, for this supplemental is what we're estimating to spend in this fiscal year. And then when I do the budget for fiscal year 25, which is 24-25, I'll have that all worked into next year's budget. Right, Jerry, you look like you had a question.
Well, I just want to make sure I understand. So since it is a reimbursement scenario, how do we get away with just one supplemental budget? It would seem like every time you have a bigger than expected bill to pay and a bigger than expected income from the loan, you'd have to do a supplemental budget. But it sounds like we're able to do a one supplemental, even though we're going to have a series of reimbursements.
Yeah, because the total amount, so the budget's authorizing the income and the expenditure. You're talking about, I had a great conversation with our finance a consultant about this, because she's done this. We actually worked on a city, and it's the cash flow issue that you were talking about. Yeah. So we need to have the authorization to do that. And so that's what the supplemental does. And then we on the back end are managing the cash flow issue and the transfers. So we'll be doing transfers as we receive invoices, and then we'll be receiving money to make up. So we'll transfer money, but we can't exceed what council gives us authority to through the supplement.
Okay.
It took my brain a minute to catch up to that.
So I appreciate that the budget committee, the full budget committee is not meeting on this. Are you planning specifically to engage the members of the budget committee in the preparation and review? Seems like that group would have a lot to offer.
Yeah, we'll certainly inform them of the process, share the resolution with them, and either, depending on timing, it will either be in writing or through a quarterly meeting, which we have one scheduled for January, or we're scheduling one for January, so it might be after the action, but they'll get the information ahead of time. And I'm going to consult with some members of the committee directly and just get some feedback.
Okay.
But it's a pretty, it's a pretty straightforward process. The city's done a number, not since I've been here, but the city's done a number of supplemental budgets. It's not an uncommon thing to do, but just as a courtesy, I think it's important to advise the budget committee on the next step. Okay. So in terms of the funding strategy, again, I kind of have this March, June, and November 23, sort of how are we going to pay for this? So we had a number of things sort of on the side here. So financing, property sales, grants, the remaining fund balance. So that's the money that was, I had estimated was remaining in the City Hall fund from previous years. General fund, what I had estimated for general fund, how that changed over time, some specific other funds, donations, and then kind of what we've already spent. So I'm going to walk through all this. You can see the difference. We had 5.7, roughly 5.8 million, and then we now need to meet this number. So financing, we originally talked about 3.5 million because I'd been really hopeful about grants, or at least trying to just see what the realm of possibility was. And this was when we were in that ballpark estimating stage. So we didn't know if the project was going to be 6 million or 5 or 4.5. So when we got more clarity around that in June, that changed to a much more realistic approach, which was 4 million. We had estimated the sales of the old City Hall to be included in this mix as $634,000. We had at that time secured the grant from Business Oregon. And my estimate at that time for the remaining fund balance in the City Hall fund was $220,000. I had estimated $544,000 to be a transfer from the general fund into the City Hall fund, and that was to cover the architect, owner's rep, and the abatement and demolition. And that was ultimately approved. The reason why this number here says 450 is because that's what's remaining. We actually did make this full transfer, but we've spent so far this fiscal year $93,812. This is up for debate, but I did remove the building fund as a transfer. Building will be housed in this location, but they now do an indirect cost transfer to the general fund, and I feel like that covers the house that we provide for them. We could still add some TLT money to this, so the restrooms that we talked about will be open. Arguably could be considered a tourist facility. We'll be providing information at the front counter. So there's potential for that as a source. But for now, I've just left it out. We've refined this number as we got the audit. So we have a draft audit, which you'll see, I think in January, we'll have the final draft. We don't think we'll have it in time for the December meeting, but if we do, you'll see it then. And I just want to give a shout out to Nina. It was near perfect, which is actually perfect. We got dinged for the stuff we always get to from being a small city, but she did a brilliant job on it. So I'm excited to have the auditor come and present that. So that gets us to a total sources of $5.6 million. And that includes what we've spent and sorry, this only includes what we spent. And then if it's inclusive of that, we get to the $6 million number. So when I did the budget, I did not mean for that to happen. Sorry. When I did the budget, if you recall, I did not have the sale of New City Hall go into the City Hall fund. It had to go straight into the general fund to kind of offset that big transfer that we did for this fiscal year. So we had time to think about where to put that. And if we were doing a supplemental, we can transfer that money in as part of the supplemental if we choose, or just given the timing of the construction, we can do that as part of the budget process. It could be that if, and I want to do some scenarios on this now that once we have the final audit, I'll be able to update our forecast model to look at what the general fund looks like. Because there's some logic in keeping that cash, and there's also some logic from spending that cash on the project. So either we use the money that we spent, which is what this current scenario includes, or that we received from the sale of City Hall, which was always the intent, and just accept that we transferred over $544,000 from last year, or we can finance it. I think as we get closer to the budget process and as we continue to talk about this, we can refine that. Our hope is, as I said, that we'll come in under budget, but I think we just all need to expect that we're going to spend $6 million. And so if we did finance that number of our borrowing number would go up. So I would like to get just kind of some initial feedback from council on that. But before we do that, I did want to jump into the grants. So the city received, we've been holding on to this since 2021, $147,000 in COVID relief funds. It's in our current budget, so it's under the non-departmental expenditures. And I'm proposing the council adopt a resolution in December. So I'm looking for general consensus today, but no decision, to declare that these funds can be transferred to the City Hall Fund for the purpose of funding the gap associated with the police station, which is also our emergency operations center. I spent a lot of time looking at, this is the state, local, federal relief funds for COVID. And the Federal Register identifies it's the final rule. So it's like, here's what you can spend that money on. And you can spend it on capital expenditures. And so I spent a long time looking at this. I also consulted with our financial advisor. The city may use the funds for programs, services, and capital expenditures that respond to the public health and negative impacts of the pandemic. We must comply with the capital expenditure requirements, which it would. The final rule enumerated types of capital expenditures that that's the federal treasury, has identified as responding to the pandemic's impacts. Recipients can also identify other expenditures if they're not enumerated and there's no pre-approval requirement. The capital expenditures that are enumerated include improvements to or construction of emergency operations centers and the acquisition of emergency response equipment. And so building, we have worked really hard with our architects to develop the police station so that in the event of a Cascadia level earthquake, that building should remain standing. We've located all of the information technology in that building, and we have designed the duty room so that it can serve as an emergency operations center. And so I feel like there's a good nexus between that and the requirements of the funds. Should we ever have to respond to a pandemic again, that facility would serve as our main EOC. We've also designed elements of the building so the conference room can also be accessible should it not be a Cascadia level earthquake. That can also be utilized as a sort of an extension of our EOC. And so I would love to hear council's thoughts and feedback on that. because that would really go a long way to help us meet that gap for a project. Brad.
From what you presented and your research, it sounds like we're within the rules to absolutely spend that $147,000 on the construction. My question would be my experience with some other organizations that I've worked with that have gotten COVID grants, COVID funds. There are deadlines date-wise to spend those funds. Do you feel like we're within our project timeline, the date by which we must use those funds? And are those funds on a reimbursement basis, or is that something that's extended to us and then we prove what we spent that on?
Thanks. Those are great questions. So yes, the funds need to be committed by December 31st, 2024. And they need to be expended by December 31st, 2026. We already have the cash, so we have it in hand. The size of the project, and we're just getting final verification of this, does not require us to do, there's no pre-approval that's required to use those funds. We would do documentation, I think, through the resolution that would help us with that. And we are confirming with the contact at the feds. We've been waiting for a couple of weeks to get confirmation, and we don't have to do a written justification, but anything under $1 million usually doesn't require a written justification. We just want to make sure that the total project cost may exceed that. And so if we do, if it's between $1 million and $10 million, you just have to have that on file. And so we're prepared to write that justification if it's necessary. It's pretty in depth. So my hope is that we'll hear back that we don't have to write that, but I do want to document it through a resolution so that we have, the appropriate paper trail to show that we've spent the money in accordance with federal rules. But yeah, since we're anticipating, I think, we start construction in March of 24. We should be done by March, April of 25. Jesse can correct me if I'm wrong here.
I would absolutely support using those funds because I know if we don't use them, we will lose them.
Yeah, I would support this. I was a little like, how does that connect until you pulled this slide up? So if you're confident that we meet the requirements, because that's the ethical question. It's a grant for a purpose and funds were dispersed. So if we're clearly in the zone of spending it on something that it was intended to be, then I'm fine with it.
That's obviously the most important thing for us, right? Sorry, Jerry.
Yeah. Well, I'm generally supportive too. I know that we have talked on the council about these funds, at least casually, going all the way back to when John Kunkel was the interim city manager. And every time we talk about him, it became apparent that use of them was pretty restricted. It wasn't just an opportunity for communities to use these dollars for unlimited purposes. And this seems like a logical and good purpose. I guess the only thing I would wonder about if as we consider a resolution to use this money in this way at the December meeting, can we at least offer not so much as options, but as for explanation purposes, can we at least offer other alternatives that the money could have been used for? I know that, and I'm not asking for a repetition of the regulatory language. I'm just wondering if in the couple of years that we've had this money on our books, have there been other things that anybody at the city staff level have thought about, have considered, have talked about, so that we can put this into sort of the context of here are the kinds of things we could have been doing with this money. This happens to be perhaps the most timely and best use of the money. And that's why we're resolving to spend it in that fashion. But it seems like we should at least know what our other options could have been. And I don't want to put anybody to
No, and thank you for bringing that up. And I really should have put a slide together about that, because we've had a couple of conversations about this money. And so I appreciate kind of reminding people of what those things were. And so off the top of my head, they could have been used for business grants for those that lost funding, but the city actually did that with resources with TLT funding. We currently have a grant program out right now to support local businesses. It could have been used for city operations that were hit because of a loss of revenue. We actually did experience a significant loss of revenue in 2020 as a result of the shutdown. So that did actually affect so there's a number of things that we could have used it for just general operations. They can be used for water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. So obviously water is the only thing that's applicable to us in that respect. The reasoning behind, it's $147,000. It isn't to say that we couldn't do something with it, but it's not significant enough that it could do something major. And we do have alternate sources of funding for water projects, which we did talk about previously. There was recently, and I might be missing something there, but I think those are the top things, and then capital expenditures that I've described. There's a new rule that was actually finalized just recently, and that was for emergency operations, but it was really specific to equipment and materials and response materials. So, you could stretch that to meet some of the equipment we'll be putting into this building, but capital expenditure felt like a much cleaner nexus. And then certain road projects, and I read through that really in depth because we don't have funding sources for roads, but as I understand it, they're not the kind of road projects that we have. So I did a very thorough examination of it because I think that is a very valid question. And I think the only real alternate use for that money would be a water related project based on my review of the Federal Register, which again, I got a second opinion on it just to make sure I was really being true to form to the requirements. But I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So hopefully that helps, and I'd be glad to go over that again if we do a resolution. But that's the. And I
think it's just important to. This appears to be a very wise choice for using the funds given the restrictions we're working under, and I just think it's since it is a choice. When we make this choice, we are saying no to other choices, and I just think it'd be good to have a reminder of what those other possibilities were.
Yeah, no, I should have included that.
Layla, can I ask a timing question? Like, let's pretend this money gets allocated to this project, and then let's pretend that we do a pretty good job, and at the end, towards the end of the project, there's, $150,000 left of contingency. Would you be able to, at that point in time, then decide we want to spend this money towards the project or use the loan, and so that you would have some options in the future? Or is this something that has to be decided way before we would know that?
I think because of the timing, and we have to have this money allocated basically within the next year, I think the cleanest thing to do is just say, and we have a gap for this EOC effectively, to just do that. And then any money that may be remaining, that goes back into the general funds, and the council has discretion to use that money for other projects. So I think it would be good to use grant money as much as we can. And then if there's cash that comes back to the project, that goes back into the general fund reserves. That's a good question. Okay. I feel like that's it. Oh yeah. So I just wanted to plant some seeds that I'm going to be doing some, I'm going to update our projections. I'll be working with our financial advisor on those. just to highlight that the council only authorized $4 million in debt, but the state gave us 5.1. And so with the resolution to accept those loan funds, I think that will get us there, but we won't need all of that 5.1. I think you can see that from what we've shared today, but we will acquire additional resources. So you saw that number went up from 4 million to 4.077 million to help us get to that gap. And I think just something to think about. There's options. We can transfer all the money that we received from the sale of Old City Hall. We can do some of it. We don't need to discuss that today, but we can discuss as we go through the budget process and update projections so that by the time you get to the GMP, you have a very clear sense of where the money is coming from. My goal would be at the GMP, we say, here's what it is. We'll have a more refined soft cost budget because we're going through a lot of that right now. And we'll have a sources and uses for you as well. And so that will set the foundation for the project.
Question. And if we defer this to budget committee discussions, that's fine. But I'm just wondering, based on our reimbursement process for the loan, would we possibly need this cash or cash flow to pay for that until we get reimbursed?
So it's a good question. So my understanding of the loan is that we are not paying debt service until it gets sold to the bond bank. So we won't have a debt service payment. We have currently, I believe, I want to check, but we have contingency, and we also have a general fund policy reserve for the general fund. And then we also have a pretty decent amount of remaining funds that are unappropriated in the general fund. So we're fortunate at the moment to be in a pretty solid financial position. So I don't have any concerns at this time. I don't anticipate any concerns even when we do take on the debt for our cash flow. But
good.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it. But, I'm always really conservative with my own money and certainly with the public's money. So
same for me. And in that vein, I would support cash being used to reduce interest cost for sure.
Yeah, I think it'll be good for you to run the numbers and then show us the options and what it means. I mean, there was significant work done on that early on in the budget committee as a part of the preparation and discussion and approval of this year's budget, and then the decision about how to do the funding. I mean, there's a lot of work that went into that. And I think the other thing that was apparent is the thing that sounds like the simple thing isn't always the best thing. And you really have to look at the numbers to see what it means. Yeah. And I felt like we still had a lot of education for all of us as well as for the community, on what those choices meant when they were made. So I'm expecting that we would look at the cash flows again. It's like working on the design and budgeting process. We know
exactly.
So, what do we want to do? What's our best guess about the bond market? Let me know who's going to predict that. But but the question of whether we would or wouldn't use the funds that we got from the sale of the Old City Hall is a little bit of I don't know. So, in my mind, that's just been, we've said we were going to do that. We've said we were going to do that from the very beginning, the way back beginning of this, we've said we're going to do that. So if there's a good reason not to do that, that would have to be a really clear reason that we all understand and can get behind. So I'm completely, I'd like you to obviously do the next stages of the work so we can see what that looks like and why we would entertain that.
Yeah. Yeah, and when we did the budget process, that's the reason why I brought it up, is that we did a bigger transfer than I had expected. And so it was sort of deferred that discussion because we didn't have the cash in hand from the sale of Old City Hall, but I needed the money right away. And so that was how I described it during the budget process. So I just want to stay true to that, okay, we'll put the money in the general fund and we'll come back to this. Because we did transfer in, $500,000 to get the work done that we needed to stay on track, which, ultimately saves us money down the road because of inflation and increased costs over time. So that's the real reason why I brought it up. We had always anticipated that, but I just think it's important that a financial decision this big, that we're just looking at all the sources and that you guys have an opportunity to provide input and feedback on what that looks like ultimately at the end, because you're the body that approves that. So I appreciate what you're saying and I agree. I just wanted to make sure I was being true to how I presented this through the budget process and kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, you are, Layla, definitely. It's just that most people don't really know or care so much about the transfers in from the general fund. It's just the idea of we had that building, we sold that building, that money, where's that money go? So it's kind of, Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you. I care a lot about those transfers. I know you do.
And so do you, I know.
And Layla, as you're putting the documentation together for us to make this decision, it's something I don't know, but I know on a personal level, if you sell something and there's capital gains, there's tax implications if you don't reinvest that money. So I don't know if that's the same for governmental body or the city, but that would be interesting to know.
No, that's one of the positives of being a public entity is we don't pay property taxes and we don't pay those kinds of taxes on a sale of a property.
Thank you. I've learned something. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Layla, I think that was an amazing presentation. I mean, the amount of work that must have gone into that was incredible. So thank you very much for providing us with that information. And certainly there's more information as we move forward to get specifics around. I do think we came to consensus that the COVID money could be used for the Emergency Operations Center with an explanation of what other options we had looked at and passed on. I think that was a very good statement. So
Great.
Unless there are other comments or questions from the council.
Thank you.
I applaud you for
thank you. There's a lot to get through and you guys did great. So appreciate it.
I think it's raised our comfort level, and the more specific we can get allows us to ask the questions that gives us a good understanding of what we need to do as we move forward. So I think this was an excellent start with more to come. So thank you.
Well, much more. Yeah, we'll be talking every month now on this. So look forward to multiple opportunities to engage with you and get this thing going.
Can't wait. Okay, so with that, I'll close the council workshop. And again, thank everybody for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying. That was really wonderful. Thanks for your information. So with that,
thank you.
I will close the meeting. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for being here, Jesse.